It began with a conversation that was never supposed to leave a private California gathering. For years, those who were there stayed silent. But now, one former friend has stepped forward with a version of events that changes everything. What started as a personal disagreement has suddenly become a revelation that reaches deep into Meghan's inner circle. And according to insiders, even Harry never knew the full story. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The claim has sent a wave of curiosity through royal watchers because it challenges a narrative that many believed had already been written. For years, public attention focused on palace disputes, royal departures, and the growing divide between the Sussexes and the rest of the monarchy. Yet according to this former friend, the origins of the conflict may have begun much earlier, in a chapter of Meghan's life that rarely receives the same scrutiny. What makes the account so compelling is not simply what was said, but the timing. This individual reportedly remained silent through interviews, documentaries, memoirs, and endless media speculation, choosing not to enter the public battle while others fought over competing versions of the truth. Now, however, that silence has been broken. And according to those familiar with the situation, the story being shared paints a far more complicated picture than many expected. The friendship itself was once viewed as exceptionally close. They celebrated milestones together, shared personal ambitions, and navigated important moments side by side. To outsiders, they appeared united by trust. There was little indication that beneath the surface, concerns were quietly beginning to grow. Yet the former friend now suggests that warning signs existed long before royal titles, palace corridors, or international headlines became part of Meghan's world. Those concerns, reportedly expressed only in private conversations, centered on patterns that few people noticed at the time. Small disagreements were brushed aside. Moments of tension were explained away. But, according to the account now emerging, those incidents gradually formed a larger pattern that became impossible to ignore. The most striking aspect of the revelation is the suggestion that many people around Meghan never fully understood the depth of those concerns. Some allegedly saw only fragments of the story, while others remained completely unaware that a serious fracture was developing behind closed doors. That is where the mystery deepens. If these tensions were present years before royal life, why were they never openly discussed? Why did so many people remain silent? And perhaps most intriguingly, how much of this was known by Harry himself? Sources close to the broader circle suggest he may have entered the relationship without access to conversations that had already shaped opinions among certain longtime acquaintances. If true, that possibility changes the entire context of what followed, because what looked like a sudden collapse may actually have been the final stage of a conflict that had been quietly unfolding for years, hidden behind loyalty, friendship, and carefully guarded silence. But the revelation was only the beginning because the roots of the fallout stretched back much further than anyone imagined. Long before headlines, interviews, and public accusations dominated the conversation, there were whispers of disagreements taking place behind closed doors. Those closest to Meghan reportedly noticed subtle changes that would eventually grow impossible to ignore. In the beginning, the friendship did not look fragile. It looked loyal, ambitious, and almost unbreakable, built during a time when Meghan was still shaping her future and surrounding herself with people who understood the climb. There were private conversations, shared dreams, late-night confidences, and the kind of trust that makes people believe they will remain in each other's lives forever. But according to insiders familiar with that early circle, the bond began to change when personal ambition started pressing against old expectations. What once felt like friendship slowly became something more complicated, because success can reveal character as sharply as failure, and in Meghan's case, those around her reportedly began sensing a new distance forming. It was not dramatic at first, no thunderous confrontation, no public collapse. Just unanswered messages, careful wording, and moments when longtime allies allegedly felt they were being moved to the edge of a life they had once helped support. Some friends reportedly believed new influences were reshaping the way Meghan viewed loyalty, privacy, and control. Others felt the old warmth was being replaced by a guardedness that made honest conversations harder. And as those concerns grew, silence became the safest option. Because challenging someone on the rise can feel like stepping into a storm without knowing where it will end. The former friend's account now suggests that this was the real beginning of the rift. Not one betrayal, but a slow rearranging of trust. The public would later see grand titles, royal interviews, palace statements, and family wounds exposed to the world. But behind all of that, a smaller and more personal fracture had already taken shape. Those who once felt close reportedly began questioning whether they still knew Meghan at all, or whether the person they trusted had disappeared beneath a carefully protected image. And if Harry never heard the full history of those early warnings, then he may have entered the most consequential relationship of his life without seeing the shadows already gathering around it. As loyalties shifted and old bonds weakened, one particular moment would become impossible to forget. According to the former friend, everything changed after one specific encounter. At the time, it seemed minor. Looking back, however, many believe it marked the exact moment the friendship began its irreversible collapse. Reports suggest the disagreement did not begin with shouting or open hostility, but with something far colder, a moment of expectation that was not met, a private request that landed badly, and a response that left one side feeling dismissed. Different versions of the encounter still circulate, each one shaped by loyalty, memory, and pain. Some say the friend felt Meghan had changed too much, too quickly. Others whisper that Meghan believed she was being judged by someone who no longer understood the pressure around her. But whatever the exact trigger, the emotional damage was immediate. People close to the circle allegedly sensed the shift almost at once. Conversations became careful. Messages grew shorter, invitations slowed. The easy trust that once held the friendship together began turning into suspicion. And when suspicion enters a relationship, even silence starts to sound like an accusation. Behind the scenes, friends reportedly began choosing sides without openly admitting it. Some remained sympathetic to Meghan, believing she was simply protecting herself from people who could not accept her transformation. Others felt the former friend had seen something real, something uncomfortable, something that exposed a deeper pattern beneath the polished surface. Attempts were reportedly made to smooth things over, but every effort seemed to reopen the wound instead of closing it. Apologies, explanations, and quiet conversations could not undo the feeling that something sacred had been broken. What made the situation more devastating was the contrast between what the friendship had been and what it had become. Once, there had been warmth, loyalty, and shared confidence. Now there was distance, guarded words, and the terrible knowledge that trust, once cracked, rarely returns in its original form. And as the divide widened, the former friend allegedly began to believe that the story being told around Meghan did not include the full truth. That belief would sit quietly for years, buried beneath public drama and royal controversy, until it became impossible to keep hidden. Yet what happened next would leave an even deeper scar than the disagreement itself. Perhaps the most surprising part of the former friend's account isn't the argument itself. It's the claim that a crucial piece of information was never shared with Harry, leaving him unaware of tensions building around him. That single claim changes the emotional weight of the entire story, because it suggests Harry may have been standing inside a conflict without fully understanding its oldest wounds. According to the former friend's version, certain conversations had already taken place before Harry became central to Meghan's life. Conversations filled with warnings, disappointment, and fears about how loyalty was being handled. Yet those details, insiders suggest, may never have reached him in their complete form. Instead, he may have heard a cleaner version, a simpler version, one where lines were easier to draw and blame was easier to place. That is where the mystery becomes sharper. Who controlled the narrative? Who decided which details mattered and which ones were better left buried? And why would a friendship once built on trust become a story told in fragments? The former friend reportedly believes misunderstandings multiplied because important context was missing. Words were repeated without tone, actions were explained without history. Old pain was reduced to isolated incidents, and the deeper pattern remained hidden behind silence. If Harry saw only the final break, not the long road that led there, then his judgment may have been shaped by an incomplete truth. That possibility is explosive, because Harry's public life has often been defined by loyalty, protection, and the belief that he was defending the woman he loved from unfair judgment. But what happens when the full background was never placed in front of him? What happens when protection is built on only part of the story? Sources familiar with the former circle claim private warnings were once raised, quietly and carefully, but were either ignored, softened, or never carried forward. Over time, that silence hardened into distance. People who might have explained their concerns stepped away. Those who remained close reportedly accepted the version they were given. And somewhere inside that gap, a hidden perspective disappeared from view. Now, years later, that missing perspective has resurfaced, not as a small correction, but as a dramatic challenge to everything people thought they understood about the rift. It does not erase the pain on either side, but it forces a harder question. Was Harry reacting to the whole truth, or only the truth he was allowed to hear? But the silence surrounding that secret would eventually create consequences far beyond one friendship. Relationships rarely collapse overnight. Instead, they crack slowly, quietly, and often out of public view. According to insiders, Meghan's circle was already beginning to divide before anyone outside noticed. At first, the divide was subtle enough to be mistaken for ordinary distance. People became busy. Messages were delayed. Plans were postponed. But beneath those simple explanations, reports suggest a more serious fracture was forming, one that split old friends into quiet factions. Some remained loyal to Meghan, convinced that she was being misunderstood by people unwilling to accept her changing life. Others reportedly felt uneasy, believing the former friend's concerns were not bitterness, but warnings. And in the middle of that tension, the inner circle began to lose the one thing every private friendship needs to survive: trust. Conversations that once felt safe became guarded. Casual remarks were weighed for hidden meaning. Longtime allies allegedly started wondering which version of events they were allowed to believe, and which version could cost them their place. That is how mistrust spreads. Not with one dramatic announcement, but through hesitation, omission, and the fear of saying the wrong thing to the wrong person. The public image remained carefully polished, but insiders claim the private reality was far more strained. Behind the confidence and charm, relationships that had once looked firm reportedly cooled one by one. Some friends stepped back quietly, choosing distance over confrontation. Others stayed close but said less, afraid that honesty would be mistaken for betrayal. The former friend now suggests this silence was not weakness, but survival. In a circle where loyalty felt increasingly tested, speaking openly could mean being pushed out, judged, or recast as the problem. That fear kept many people quiet for years, even as the emotional damage deepened. And while the outside world later focused on royal tension, palace wounds, and the dramatic Sussex split, this earlier collapse revealed something more personal and perhaps more painful. Before Meghan became a royal figure at the center of global debate, there were already people close to her who felt the ground shifting beneath them. Their doubts did not explode into headlines at once. They stayed hidden, building pressure in private, until the divide became too wide to ignore. By then, the friendship at the heart of the story was no longer simply damaged. It had become a symbol of something larger, a warning that when old loyalties are tested by ambition, secrecy, and control, even the strongest bonds can become casualties. As more people stepped back, the true scale of the fallout became impossible to conceal. Years passed before anyone dared revisit the story. Then, unexpectedly, the former friend decided the silence had lasted long enough. What followed sent shockwaves through those who thought the chapter had been closed forever. Reports suggest the decision to speak was not made lightly, because silence had become its own kind of protection. For years, the former friend reportedly watched as public narratives hardened, Old relationships were reduced to simple labels, and complicated private history was folded into a much larger royal drama. But eventually, according to insiders, the weight of being misunderstood became too heavy to carry. The friends' decision to come forward was described by some observers as a personal reckoning, not a public attack. Yet in royal-adjacent circles, even a private truth can explode like a palace decree. Almost immediately, commentators began asking why this version had remained hidden for so long. Was it fear of backlash, loyalty to the past, or the painful knowledge that speaking out would reopen wounds others wanted sealed forever? The new details challenged assumptions that had shaped the story for years. Suddenly, moments once treated as simple disagreements appeared more layered. Former silences looked less like indifference and more like restraint. Old tensions, once dismissed as personal bitterness, began to seem like early warnings that were never fully examined. That is what made the revelation so powerful. It did not merely add another voice to an already crowded conversation. It forced people to look again at the foundations of the narrative itself. If the former friend's account is accurate, then the collapse of trust around Meghan was not sudden, not accidental, and not created only by royal pressure. It had roots in choices, conversations, and private fractures that began before the world was watching. Observers reacted sharply, with some calling the timing suspicious, and others insisting that delayed truth is still truth. But beneath the debate was a deeper emotional reality. Once someone breaks years of silence, every memory becomes evidence, every past decision gains new meaning, and every unanswered question grows louder. The friend's account did not close the story. It opened it again, with greater force, greater pain, and a darker sense that the public may have seen only the final chapter of a much older conflict. And as renewed scrutiny turned back toward old events, one thing became impossible to ignore. The past was no longer settled. Yet the biggest impact wasn't what was revealed, it was how those revelations changed the way people viewed everything that came before. Once a hidden piece of the puzzle emerges, every previous event suddenly looks different. Moments once dismissed as insignificant now appear loaded with meaning, creating a dramatically different picture of the past. That is why this former friend's account has become so unsettling. It does not simply reopen an old wound. It forces every earlier chapter to be re-examined under a harsher light. Past interviews, public statements, and carefully framed explanations now draw fresh attention, because people begin asking whether the full story was ever truly visible. Supporters may see the revelation as another unfair attempt to question Meghan's choices, while critics may view it as confirmation that deeper tensions existed long before royal pressure became the explanation for everything. But between those extremes sits the more complicated truth. Relationships collapse through layers, and each layer changes the meaning of the one beneath it. The former friend's perspective reshapes the discussion because it adds a voice from before the palace, before the titles, before the global arguments over loyalty and betrayal. It suggests that the questions surrounding trust and transparency did not begin at Windsor. They began in private rooms, in friendships, in conversations that were never meant to become part of royal history. And now, with those claims resurfacing, the search for accountability becomes more intense. Who knew the full context? Who stayed silent? Who benefited when certain details remained hidden? These are not small questions, because they strike at the heart of how public narratives are built. A single missing detail can turn a warning into gossip, a concern into jealousy, and a broken friendship into a story no one fully understands. That is the emotional force behind this revelation. It reminds viewers that behind a polished interview and every public defense, there may be older stories still waiting in the shadows. Harry's role becomes even more complicated in this light. If he entered the situation believing one version of events, then every reaction that followed may have been shaped by what he did not know as much as by what he did. Meghan, too, becomes part of a more layered portrait, one where success, pressure, image, and loyalty collide in painful ways. Nothing feels simple anymore. Every memory is contested. Every silence has weight. Every former bond becomes evidence of a larger fracture. And as the past is pulled apart piece by piece, the public is left not with certainty, but with a deeper and more troubling suspicion that the real story was always buried beneath the one everyone thought they knew. But even after all the revelations, one final question continues to linger over the entire story. The friendship may be over, the secrets may be exposed, and the silence may finally be broken. Yet one mystery remains unresolved. If this truth had emerged years earlier, would everything have turned out differently? That question now hangs over the entire rift, like the final shadow of a story that refuses to rest. Because once trust is damaged, time does not always heal it. Sometimes time only gives the wound a deeper place to hide. The former friend's account suggests that what collapsed between them was not simply a friendship, but a whole chain of understanding that might have changed how others saw the situation. If Harry had heard every warning, every concern, every painful detail before the lines were drawn, would he have asked different questions? Would Meghan have faced the past differently? Would old allies have found a way back before silence hardened into distance? No one can answer that with certainty, and that uncertainty is what makes the ending so powerful. Reconciliation may once have been possible, but according to insiders, secrecy narrowed the path until pride, protection, and public pressure made it almost impossible to return. The fallout left consequences far beyond the people directly involved. It shaped public perception, deepened divisions, and added another layer to the already painful story surrounding Meghan and Harry's break from royal life. Supporters will argue that Meghan had every right to protect herself from people she no longer trusted. Critics will insist the former friend's revelations prove there was more behind the polished narrative than the public was ever allowed to see. But somewhere between those two views lies the human cost: broken loyalty, misunderstood silence, and the lingering ache of words left unsaid. Harry's position remains especially haunting because he stands at the center of a controversy that may have begun before he fully understood the few people around it. If he acted from love, then the question becomes whether love was guided by the whole truth or only by the version placed before him. And for the former friend, the final reflection appears less about revenge than release, a decision to stop carrying a hidden chapter alone. That is why this revelation matters. Not because it solves every mystery, but because it reminds us that private fractures can shape public history in ways no one sees until much later. And as the dust settles around yet another royal-adjacent revelation, one lesson remains impossible to ignore. Sometimes the truths kept hidden, the longest leave the deepest scars when they finally emerge. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.